let's look at some formula manipulation. So you can see we have a bunch of formulas here. And what we need to do is manipulate the formula. This means you just want to rearrange the formula to get a specific letter on its own. So for example, the first one here, 3a plus 2b equals c. We need to manipulate this to get the letter a on its own. So the easiest way to learn this is through a couple of examples. So let's start off here with the easiest one, question 1. 3a plus 2b equals c. So 3a plus 2b equals c, we need to get a on its own. So formula manipulation is really just a revision over your basic algebra, you know. So most of you guys would be happy enough if I said 3x plus 5 is equals to 26, and you wanted to solve this, you would simply say 3x is equals to 26 take 5, 3x is equals to 21, x is equals to 21 divided by 3, which is 7. So when we have some basic linear equation, it's fairly straightforward to solve. But a lot of times what happens to students is as soon as you throw in letters rather than numbers, they get confused. But the important thing you have to understand is the rules of algebra never change. The rules of algebra are always going to be the same, whether you're dealing with letters, numbers, symbols, whatever, the rules stay the same. So how I solve this one here is exactly the same way as I'm going to solve for the letter A here. So I want to isolate the letter A. So therefore, I need to subtract the 2b to the other side to begin with. So my first step will be 3a is equals to c minus 2b. Now, how do I go from 3a to a? Well, I have to divide by 3. So therefore, dividing both sides by 3, a would be c minus 2b divided by 3. So that's fairly straightforward. I hope you agree. Let's have a look at another simple enough example. The next one I'll go through with you is question 4 here. xy plus z is equals to q, and we want to find y on its own. So xy plus z is equals to q, find y. So y, the term xy is here, so the term z we can get rid of first, subtract it to the other side. So xy is equals to q minus z. Then to get y on its own, right now it's multiplied by x, so I need to divide both sides by x to get y on its own. So therefore y is going to be q minus z over x. As you can see here, formula manipulation is really just your basic algebra rules, but oftentimes with letters rather than numbers. Let's pick it up 11 and look at a slightly more difficult example. The one I'm going to do with you this time is question 14. P equals Q over 5 minus 3R. P equals Q over 5 minus 3R, and this time I want to get Q on its own. The first thing you notice here is I have an equation with fractions. Now we know in order to simplify this situation, anytime you have an equation with fractions, you're going to multiply each term by the lowest common denominator, and our lowest common denominator in this case is 5. So I'm going to take each term and multiply it by 5. All right, and that will cancel here. So my next line is going to be 5p is equals to q minus 15r. Now I want to get q on its own. So there's a couple of ways to do it. I'll go through it step by step here and there. So if I want to get q on its own, let's bring q to the left and have the 5p on the right. So I would say minus q is equals to minus 15r minus 5p. So I just rearranged it to subtract the q to the left and subtract the 5p over to the right. Now here I have minus q. It's important to understand that I'm not looking for minus q, I'm looking for q. I don't want minus q, I want q. So how do I go from minus q to q? Well, I take the line and I multiply it by minus 1, therefore changing the sign. So therefore q will equal 15r plus 5p, and that is q isolated. Let's look at a more challenging example again. The one I'll have a look at this time is question 21 here. Let's just zoom into this. So xy over 3 minus xz over 8 equals yz over 6. Solve for y. Okay. So I've got xy over 3 minus xz over 8 equals y over 6. So same again. We have an equation that has fractions in it. Our first step is to take each term, multiply it by the lowest common denominator in order to get rid of our fractions. So the lowest common denominator between 3, 8, and 6, our lowest common denominator in this case is going to be 24. So we take each term and we're going to multiply it by 24. Here the 3 will cancel with 24, leaving an 8. 8 will divide into 24, leaving a 3. 6 will divide into 24, leaving a 4. So what's my next line? It's 8 times xy minus 3 times xz equals 4 times yz. So I've simplified the situation a little bit. I've gotten rid of my fractions by multiplying across by the lowest common denominator. Now, I need to solve for y. So every term with a y in it needs to be on the left-hand side. So this term has a y in it, and this term has a y in it. So both of these terms need to be on the left, and the minus 3xz, I can add that to the right. So continuing on here, I have 8xy minus 4yz equals 3xz. Now I want to get y on its own. Y right now is in two different terms. In other words, y is the common factor for both of these terms. So in order to isolate y, I'm going to factorize it out. It is the common factor. So factorizing out my y times 8x minus 4z is equals to 3xz. So I'm almost there. I need to isolate y. I need to get y on its own. Right now, y is multiplied by 8x minus 4z. So therefore, I need to divide both sides by 8x minus 4z to isolate y, to get y on its own. So my final step, y must be equals to 3xz divided by 8x minus 4z. So this one, a little bit more complicated, brought in the lowest common denominator and the common factor. But this is all stuff you already know from your algebra. Just because you've got letters instead of numbers, the rules haven't changed. Let's look at one more example here. Let's look at question 32 here. P squared over Q equals R, and you have to solve for P. All right. So P squared over Q is equals to R, and we want to solve for P. First of all, notice that I have a fraction. It's an equation of fraction. So once again, we get rid of our fraction by multiplying every term by the lowest common denominator. In this case, the lowest common denominator is Q. So my next line is going to be P squared equals QR. How am I going to solve for P on its own if I have P squared? Well, you should know, for example, if I had x squared is equals to 25, x therefore would be the square root of 25. So we would say x is plus or minus 5. So that idea is the same right here. If P squared equals QR, then P must be plus or minus the square root of QR. And that's it. So that is our introduction to formula manipulation. As you have seen, it really is just using your algebra rules and applying them to different formulas. So the best thing for you guys to do is just practice them. You can get better at these fast if you practice them. So just practice some of these questions, check your solutions, and for access to questions, solutions, graded quizzes, and more, visit www.limymaths.com.